1998 until October 2001. He's been a Foreign Service officer since June 1995. It's my pleasure to welcome Ambassador Vanu Menon. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you. I've entitled my opening remarks as Challenges Facing Small States at the UN. And in preparing for this session, I was almost carried away into believing that I could perhaps make my opening remarks without any notes, until I was reminded of a story about how not too long ago, a large seminar was held for ministers and reverends in training. And among the facilitators was a very well-known motivational speaker. And one of these speakers went up, boldly approached the pulpit, and gathering the entire crowd's attention, said, "The best years of my life were spent in the arms of a woman who wasn't my wife." And the crowd was shocked, and there were loud gasps. But he followed up by saying, "That woman was my mother." The crowd burst into laughter, and he gave his speech, which was well received. About a week later, one of the ministers who had attended the seminar decided to use that joke for his own purpose when he was giving a sermon from a pulpit. As he shyly approached the pulpit one Sunday morning, he tried to rehearse the joke in his head. He was a bit foggy. Getting to the microphone, he said loudly, "The greatest years of my life were spent in the arms of a woman who was not my wife." Again, the congregation, a different congregation, was shocked, and they started murmuring. And after standing there for almost 10 seconds, trying to recall the second half of the joke, the pastor finally blurted out, and I can't remember who she was. Well, I didn't want to end up in a similar predicament today, so I decided to prepare some notes for the session. But let me begin by thanking ACUNS for inviting me, together with Chris Hackett, to his annual meeting and to participate in this plenary session on small states at the UN. It is befitting that this discussion on small states is taking place in Trinidad, in the Caribbean, a sub-region composed entirely of small states. On a personal note, let me say how happy I am to be here. You may not believe this, but this is my first trip to the Caribbean, excluding Cuba. Surprisingly, I've been there 3 times. More importantly, it is a sub-region with which Singapore, another small state, shares a strong sense of kinship. I've always considered the CARICOM and my friends on the South Pacific as among my best friends at the UN. Ladies and gentlemen, President John F. Kennedy, in an address before the Irish Parliament on 28th of June 1963, reminded us of the varied and invaluable contributions of small states by invoking the words of a great English orator who had made the following observation, and I quote, all the world owes much to the little 5-feet-high nations. The greatest art of the world was the work of little nations. The most enduring literature of the world came from little nations. The heroic deeds that thrilled humanity through generations were the deeds of little nations fighting for their freedom, unquote. While these words were uttered in Ireland, they were equally applicable to other small states, and especially true for this part of the world. The countries of the Caribbean might be 5-feet-high nations, but between them they produce 4 Nobel laureates. On a per capita basis, I don't think there's any other sub-region in the world which can claim to be as prolific as the Caribbean based on this measure of success and achievement. One might be tempted to extrapolate this line of thinking to the performance of small states at the UN and to assume that they've done as well at the UN in securing their political and economic interests. After all, of the 192 member states of the UN, at least 100 are deemed to be small, being members of a special informal grouping of the UN called the Forum of Small States. The Forum of Small States, or FOSS, F-O-S-S, is a loose, non-ideological and non-geographical coalition of small states coordinated by Singapore and based on common interests. And members meet regularly to exchange views and coordinate positions where they can. But I must say I'm sorry to disappoint. The record of small states at the UN has been at best mixed. Often we don't bring our collective influence to bear on any issue. Why is that so? What are the problems confronting small states and which prevent them from operating more effectively at the UN? I can think of several reasons. First, there is the problem of resources and coverage. Small states invariably do not have the manpower to cover comprehensively all the issues and committees at the UN, let alone have people running about to obtain information and do political analysis. Small states with small delegations may not be able to put out as many feelers to larger delegations. Some of the larger countries are represented by at least two delegates in every committee of the UN. In the case of the small states, sometimes you have less than one person covering a committee of the UN. And this could be a disadvantage when gathering information. And as you know, information can mean a lot of things at the UN. It is power and influence at the UN. The shortage of resources and coverage, a real problem for small states, also means spotty attendance at meetings, missing out on the informal processes which are an important aspect of UN work, including discussions in the corridors and participating in smaller working groups, and an inability to engage in robust debate, either because they do not know what is going on or do not have a sufficiently good picture of what is going on the many issues at the UN. As a result, small states sometimes display a lack of self-confidence, questioning their own ability to provide credible input, since they have not been following the discussions as thoroughly as other bigger delegations. This resource and concomitant coverage problem means that most small states end up being led by their noses, by the larger delegations that know what they're talking about. And because many small delegations are not able to be present at various meetings, the problem gets further compounded. During negotiations in particular, other delegations want to work with states that they can rely on and which they know will be present at all meetings. So if you're not seen to be reliable, not being present at all these meetings to lend support to someone else's position, you get cut off. You become a non-player. You end up being marginalized. The second problem is one relating to access. Small states are generally excluded from the real discussions. The UN Security Council is the most egregious example, with the 5 permanent members dominating in small groups and stringing the others along. But this probably holds true for all sorts of other fora, like the Green Room of the World Trade Organization in Geneva, the General Assembly President's small consultations, and any other form of consultation that takes place at the UN. I am particularly reminded of what happened during the final round of negotiations on the outcome document for the high-level summit in conjunction with the 60th anniversary of the UN in 2005. In the final stages, the President of the General Assembly decided to confine negotiations to just 20 or so delegations, leaving out the small states, with the exception of the facilitators, some of whom, like Chris, are from small countries but were there in their personal capacities. To some extent, this is the fault of the small states. They're not knowledgeable, are perceived to be not knowledgeable. Hence, they're deemed to be unable to contribute constructively. Most of them don't speak when they attend meetings. They're ciphers, and therefore they get ignored. One needs not only to have constructive inputs, but also to be prepared to make oneself heard and sometimes make a pain of oneself. You have to rant and rave and push your way into the small group negotiations. And most small states don't feel secure enough to do that. The third problem is one of heft, or clout, or weight. In this regard, small states have none, unless they band together. But unfortunately, they very often don't do that. Because they are poor, or weak, or unfocused, they allow themselves to be peeled off individually and literally bought off. This is done by the big countries and blocs comprising the developed countries. Just look at the Forum of Small States, the forum I just mentioned a short while ago. We meet informally, but invariably never attempt to develop common positions on any of the issues that are discussed at the UN. We start doing that. Some will have to toe the European Union line, others will have to toe the OIC line or the NAM line, non-aligned line, and therefore end up causing more trouble and problems for yourself. Unless we develop heft, by which I mean becoming less dependent on the West for economic aid and technical assistance, the small developing states will find it difficult to stand up for what they believe in or to band together to promote the collective interests of small states in general. On some issues like stem cell research or even the question of the death penalty, I witnessed for myself what pressure can do to dissuade a small state from voting for what it really believes in. Sometimes small states even take positions at the UN which are contrary to what is spelled out in the national legislation. When asked, they will tell you sheepishly and in private that as much as they would have liked to support you, as a matter of principle, they've been instructed by their governments to vote differently because of pressure being brought to bear upon them by the developed countries.